robbers. Any student, by painstaking effort, can master Hebrew and Greek, but no scholar has ever yet been able to learn the language of grace without the assistance of the Holy Ghost. B.G. Wilkinson. In studying Daniel chapter 8 regarding the daily, it led me to the 1919 Bible conference, of which I read the transcript and then unpublished letters about it from Washburn, Holmes, Wilkinson, and others. But one man was not invited to that Bible conference until the very last minute. So he was not prepared for being asked to give a presentation on Daniel 11, but he gave a masterful one. In reading that presentation, I came across many gems of history and truth, and today would like to look at one of them given in that presentation from the 1919 conference by a real stand-patter, B.G. Wilkinson. This little excerpt we will look at today will give you some insight into the enemy, Rome, which is pertinent to understand with Revelation 13 and the sea beast. And let's not forget the beautiful book of Romans. What does the name mean? And where did they come from? Let us see. First, let's begin with a little bit about who was B.G. Wilkinson, the man who gave the presentation on Daniel 11. Well, it was Benjamin George Wilkinson, 1872 to 1968. He was an Adventist theologian and president of Washington Missionary College. And yes, we are not fond of theologians, but Wilkinson was an exception. He wrote, "In awe of his word, our authorized Bible vindicated and truth triumphant. All three books every good Adventist will want to own and read." And Wilkinson fought bravely for the truth of one true God, the King James Bible, the daily, and the pioneer view, which was the faith of Jesus. He was a needle to the pole, a stand-patter. Lexicons? Well, before I read from Wilkinson's presentation on Daniel 11, I would like to address a criticism before it forms. He uses lexicons, but if you know the backstory of what he believed about them and how he believed in sola scriptura, you then wonder, not criticize, why did he? Well, let us see what his good friend Stuart Kime had to say to him in a letter. Stuart Kime, there are no dates known online of when he was born or when he died. I just know from reading unpublished letters that he must have been very old in 1950 and that he was close friends with Holmes, Washburn, and Wilkinson. If you were to go online and try to find out information about Stuart Kime, you will find almost nothing. They have made more of a ghost of Stuart Kime than they did Claude Holmes. And when I wrote the secret archives of the Adventism asking for any unpublished letters or works by Kime, they only had one file that they would give me, and that was, "Does Jesus have a beginning?" And what a beautiful 13-page presentation he made. But this was found about Kime online. According to Google, he was known for his firm stance on maintaining the doctrinal purity of Adventism, especially in the face of what he saw as compromises and liberal trends with the broader Adventist church. He was associated with promoting present truth, a concept within Adventism that emphasizes adhering to the latest understanding of God's will as revealed in Scripture, and often criticized any deviations from traditional Adventist teachings. Kime was not without controversy. What do you think that controversy was? Well, as best I can figure out, He seems to be the man that was the father of the independent Adventist movement. And he started a magazine, The Fundamental Adventist. And of course, you can't find a copy of it anywhere. But that's what I think is the reason that they have scrubbed him. He said in 1949 in a letter to B.G. Wilkinson, September 9, 1949, unpublished. If I thought time would last and I would live another 5 years, I would begin an intensive study of Hebrew and Greek. I only have a smattering of Greek. I would not do this for a help in the study of the Bible or for the better understanding of the Bible, but only to be intelligent in meeting these subtle and craftily devised arguments of these would-be wise ones. Why should I, though, when you are here and so well equipped for doing so? It seems, though, that the fact of one against the many is not a fair match. I know, though, that David vanquished Goliath and Gideon's 300 met the myriads of the Midianites. God's truth will triumph. So now you see why Wilkinson would resort to using lexicons with these wily wise ones. So let us begin here in the presentation by Wilkinson at the 1919 Bible Conference. I shall devote the rest of my time to the presentation of historical evidence that Rome is introduced into the prophecy in the 14th verse of the 11th chapter and fits the appellation, the robbers of thy people, who were to exalt themselves to establish the vision. A great deal better than a motley band of robbers and outlaws among the Jews in Palestine, as is held by the new view. There are many excellent authorities that sustain this construction of the text and render it the robbers of thy people, the breakers of thy people, and the destroyers of thy people, etc. How remarkably this designation fits the little horn that was to wax exceeding great in the vision of the 8th chapter of Daniel. He shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people, and he shall also stand up against the prince of princes. But he, Rome, shall be broken without hands. The robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall, that is, they shall be broken without hands, without human instrumentality. The original name of the Romans was robbers. Mommsen, Volume 1, Book 1, Chapter 4, Paragraph 1. This much is certain, says Mommsen, that in the oldest form of it, the name of the Romans, known to us, the inhabitants of the canton on the hills of the Tiber, are called not Romans, but by a shifting sound that frequently occurs in the earlier period of a language, but fell very early into abeyance in Latin. Romnians, Romneys, a fact which constitutes an expressive testimony to the immortal antiquity of the name. Romneys means foresters or bushmen, and bushman was the ancient term for robbers. Hence, Ramnes or Romnian, contracted later to Romans, means literally robbers or violent men, the children of the violent. Later, they also called themselves Romani Apolline, or Romans of the Hill. Others called them hillsmen and Mount Romans. They were a lot of robbers and outlaws, and consequentially, their appellation, Romnians, later contracted to Romans. In Arnold's History of Rome, Chapter 1, Paragraph 9, we read, Romulus set apart a place of refuge to which any man might flee and be safe from his pursuers. So many fled thither from the country round about, and those who had shed blood and fled from the avenger of blood, and even son of low degree, who had run away from their lords. And so the city was filled with people, men, and they wanted wives, and the nations round about them would not give them any wives. Now, I'll interrupt the statement to give a little backdrop on the Avenger of Blood and the city of refuge that is set up by God in the Bible. We did a Bible study on this titled The Avenger of Blood, and it's under the women's studies. The Bible shares in Deuteronomy 19 how God set up 6 cities where a manslayer could flee to and seek refuge if he had not committed the crime intentionally. He would not have to stay there. He would have to stay there in order to be safe from the avenger of blood, the next of kin to the one killed. He would have to stay there until the high priest of the city died. Then he could go free. And you wonder, where would he go? Does what we just read mean that some of the Jewish men who left the city of refuge eventually became the Romans? Is this the same city of refuge in the Bible, or was this a counterfeit? So it makes me wonder and go, were the Romans derived from the Jews who left the city of refuge? Well, let us continue with Wilkinson. Thus, they resorted to a curious expedient. A great festival in honor of Neptune was appointed, and the neighboring families were invited to come with their families. In the midst of the games, the young Romans rushed among the spectators, and each seizing a maiden, carried her off to be his wife. Thus they stole their wives, and the surrounding nations, the Greeks and the Sabines, from whom they stole their wives, called them robbers. In Rollin's Ancient History, books 32 and 23, section 3, paragraph 31, we find a letter written by Mithridates, king of Armenia, to Arsaces, king of the Parthians, as follows. Do you know that the Romans, when they found themselves stopped by the ocean in the west, turned their arms this way, that to look back to their foundation and origin, whatever they had from violence, homes, wives, and dominion. A vile herd of every kind of vagabond, without country, without forefathers, they established themselves for the misfortune of the human race. Neither divine or human laws restrain them from destroying remote neighbors, the weak or the powerful, their allies or friends. They reckon as enemies all that are not their slaves, and especially whatever bears the name of king. It will be for your immortal glory to have supported 2 great kings and to have conquered and destroyed those robbers of the world. The Hebrew word for robbers in Daniel 11:14 is a very significant word and is only used by the Lord himself, once in Daniel, once in Jeremiah, and again in Ezekiel, once in Isaiah, and once in the Psalms. The Hebrew is parite. Isaiah applies it to a ravenous beast. Ezekiel, in predicting the future destruction of Jerusalem after the fashion of Moses' prediction in the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy, concludes by saying, I will give it into the hands of the strangers for a prey, and to the wicked of the earth for a spoil, and they shall pollute it. My face will I also turn from them, and they shall pollute my secret place, for the robbers shall enter into it and defile it. This cannot refer to Nebuchadnezzar, for he had already polluted the sanctuary and then its vessels as prey and spoil. It must refer to the future pollution of the sanctuary by the Romans in AD 70. In Psalm 17:4, the Hebrew word parite is translated the destroyer. Gesenius, in his Hebrew lexicon, defines the word parite: one violent, rapacious, an oppressor, a tyrant. How fittingly the appellations, the destroyer of thy people, who shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, in those times apply to the Romans. How aptly the expressions, the destroyers of thy people, who shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, fits into the language of the vision of Daniel 8:24 and 25. Here, imperial Rome is represented in the following descriptive language: and he shall magnify, exalt himself, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes. It was imperial Rome that was to stand up against the prince of princes. It was imperial Rome that was to establish the vision of the 70 weeks in Daniel 9th chapter, that was to determine upon his people and his holy city. It was imperial Rome that was to make possible the fulfillment of this vision, which was to seal up both the vision and the property, which was to seal up both the vision and the prophecy and make them sure. When they cut off, or literally put to death as a malefactor, the Messiah. It is this same vision that the angel again refers to in Daniel 11:14. It is the same Prince of Princes that the angel refers to in Daniel 11:22, the Prince of the Covenant. The Prince of the Covenant does not mean a prince of a covenant. The angel is specific in his language, just as God is when he says, the seventh day is the Sabbath, not a seventh day or any seventh day. The Prince of the Covenant, it is a specific prince and a specific covenant. Of what covenant is Christ the Prince? For what covenant was he broken? The word broken here is shabar and means to meet a violent end or death when applied to men. The Prince of the Covenant was to meet a violent death, and Paul states that the Old Covenant was ratified with the blood of animals which met a violent death. Therefore, it was necessary that the New Covenant be ratified by the death of the Prince of Life in the same way. It is the same mighty imperial Rome that caused craft or deceit to prosper in his hand. In Daniel 8:25, that was to work deceitfully after the league was perfected between the Jews and Romans in 161 BC. While the Romans promised to protect the Jews and preserve their land and nation and violate from all their enemies, the Caesars, who did according to their own will, before whom none were able to stand, finally entered into the glorious land, and by their hands it was consumed. And that was the end of the excerpt by Wilkinson on the robbers in his presentation at the 1919 Bible Conference.